working on a new product that I'm hoping to get to launch sooner than later called Groupie. For an icebreaker about me, two of the things that you might have seen out in the world that I created, as stupid as they were. One is this tweet on the left, back when I used to be on Twitter more often, about a grown-ass man who was mad at his girlfriend at Olive Garden, so he made a menu for it. This tweet went viral and got me this close to being on Good Morning America, back when Twitter was a little more edgy and popular than it might be today. And the production team was actually on the way to my house, and Olive Garden PR called them and told them to shut it down because they didn't think it reflected positively on the brand. And if they read the replies to this tweet, they would have been exactly right. And then number two is, if you remember back a few years ago when stickers were actually new and people still liked them and thought they might use them every day, I created a sticker pack called Phonies, which let you place. Hey, thank you. It was going to be sad if no one knew these two things and I was just talking about myself. So thank you. You put a turns out to be trademark Apple Blue phony on top of your friend's text to you, and it makes them look like they're saying things like, oops, I just pooped myself, or you were right all along, I'm always wrong. And so that stayed on the App Store for a week. Apple called me the day after it got on TechCrunch and Daring Fireball and said to change everything about it or they'd pull it down. I wrote an article about that conversation and said, I will not change it, so pull it down in a week. And in that week, it sold 30,000 copies, so that was a lot of fun. So the rest of my career has been a little less interesting than those things. Maybe think about one of my favorite quotes from John Malkovich. It relates a lot to bootstrapping, I think. And his philosophy of movie making is basically, I make one for them, and then I make one for me. And from an actor's standpoint, he's saying, I make a big budget, stupid movie that I may or may not be excited about, and then that gives me the money and the ability to make a smaller movie that hits all my artistic needs. And I don't know if it's just me up here who feels this way about my career sometimes as a bootstrapper, but my corporate gigs have definitely been the for them of my career path. Coming out of school, working for a big multimedia conglomerate. A couple years later, joining a startup, which was at the time all I wanted to do in the world, called JotSpot. About a year later, we got bought by Google, and don't let them tell you anything with their really great PR, but it's just a big, huge multinational conglomerate. So after a couple years of just a really dorky corporate environment, I left to start another bootstrap startup called MoxUp, which was basically Envision before Envision, until Envision got a bunch of money, stole all my best ideas, and bought me for a pittance a little while later. And then my last corporate gig was at a company then called Lithium, which I'll talk about in a minute, but now called Khoros, which is a terrible name. And I was actually working on that platform for about 5 years, and it's a community platform. And I left late last year to work on my current app, current SaaS app, Groupie. So when I started at Lithium, I'm going to call it Lithium, not Khoros, I felt like maybe I'd made a wrong turn in my career. In the mid-2010s, I was working on forum software, and I thought that I could maybe have been more than that as a designer working on a 20-plus year technology. But after a year or so, much to my surprise, the app or the space kind of started growing on me. One of the things was it was productized consulting. I was in the professional services team, and that was the first time I'd ever consulted for a product. And I liked the baseline that it set. So you're using your creativity and your constraints to try and make this product, which was at the time already almost 10 years old, a little long in the tooth. You're trying to make it suit these modern needs for companies like Airbnb. So for Airbnb, an online community for them is hosts talking to hosts. So how many towels do I set up? When should my check-in hours be? I've never done this before. Can someone help me out? And Airbnb's community is almost 500,000 members strong, so there's usually someone online to help those people out. For an Etsy, that is sellers helping sellers. So, who do you use for shipping and handling? What do you do during the holiday crunch? And it can also be more aspirational. A community doesn't have to be just a support forum. It can be more aspirational, like Google Local Guides. Google Local Guides is Google's attempt to compete with Yelp. Anytime you leave a comment on a Google Maps spot, that's considered you using local guides. So they wanted to get people excited about this product. They wanted it to be more than it was. So they created a community for people to share travel tips and more aspirational things in order to create this like-minded community behind their product. So after several years of working on these communities and enjoying the work, all except for the fact that the platform, like I mentioned, was long in the tooth, and my days became more about calming down upset customers because something had crashed or trying to make up for the deficiencies in the software. So eventually I'd had enough of that, and I felt, of course, like I could do that better. As the designer in me needs to point out that this is the last week's landing page that I had to make quickly for this talk. It looks a lot better now, so I'm going to go ahead and quickly skip past that. But a few things that I learned in those years working on communities. Number one of the things I had to constantly talk to my customers and clients about at Lithium, I kind of called it a post-web world. Like, no one's going to come to your community and join it just for the sake of the warm, fuzzy feeling of joining your community. No one's going to sign up without a desperate need right then to get a question answered, or maybe answer a question, but most likely they have a need that needs serving right now. So our larger companies, like an Airbnb or Etsy, they would use single sign-on. So they would connect to their own login platform, and it would be kind of a silent handoff to transition them to the community product so they don't have to create another account. But for the smaller companies that I'm going to be servicing with Groupie, a lot of customers want to try, the marketing department often uses a community as a way to go around the developers in their team to get a lot more information from their users. So that's one of the things that hamstrings a lot of communities, is people try to put a driver's license application into the onboarding for their community so that they don't have to try and convince their boss that they need these extra fields for the users. So from the aspect of Groupie, I don't know if that shows up very well, but I'm using essentially passwordless sign up and login to try and get around that problem point of most communities. So send a verification code or a magic link, log in, and get started right away. And I hope that, especially for mobile users, breaks down. One of the biggest barriers that I saw was people just not wanting to sign up for a community. Number two, the thing that I spent most of my days on as a designer and a developer, good-looking communities are a lot of work, mostly because at its core, especially an old school support forum, it's a wall of text that you're fighting every day. It's just people writing titles for their post, even if they don't really feel like they needed to, just because the software forces them to. It's hard to upload images because you're dealing with a 10-year-old piece of software, so you're constantly fighting this wall of text. And the ways that I found to most inject visual interest into a community were top-down and bottom-up. So top-down is an admin or a community moderator, it being as easy as possible for them to feature content that is visually interesting throughout the community. That's the way that even if there's not an image attached to that post or an interesting image attached to that post, an easy way to feature for a moderator something visually interesting makes it a lot more likely that they will, and makes that wall of text start to break up with interesting imagery. And then bottom up, make it dead simple for the user to add good imagery. For my work with Groupie, that is not just having the catch-all post of title and body, breaking it up into events, breaking it up into quick posts, articles, and then questions, so that helps create a little bit of visual interest on the page. And I'll show you in a minute what that looks like. But also, just for the administrators, I worked really hard to make featuring as easy as possible, but also as powerful as possible. So if there's an image in the post, it automatically adds that image to the feature at the top. But also, there's a library of imagery, of colorful imagery that the user can choose to change the background and then change the color. So simple stuff for us, but for just a community moderator or an admin, they can very quickly add visual interest to a page. And down there is an example of an event, MicroConf 2019, to break up a page and make it a lot more like the social networks that users are now used to, and a lot less like the 20-year-old support forums that the tools were built for. This was a really interesting one that I think comes kind of as a combination of people wanting to live their lives a little less online the past few years. I know personally for me, getting off social networking, not trying to keep my phone at home as much as possible, and in a lot of the online communities that I worked with towards the end of my stay at Lithium, they were trying to work in real life events in order to kind of buttress up their only online communications. A really good example of a company that does this really well is Dribbble. Their Dribbble meetups are global. When you think of Dribbble, you think of their online community, but you also think of their physical events that they have every week around the world. And so for me, with Groupie, that means making events into a first-class citizen. So not only is it, I have a question I need to answer, or I have something to say, it is, show your interest in this event on the community, and we'll garner an offline community as well as an online community. My last point is people will bitch. The biggest hurdle to get over with any community is the constant onslaught of negativity, or just a very popular community like Airbnb. They have 500,000 members posting a lot every day, and all that content is really hard to get through. So my biggest, that's all whitewashed, that's okay. My biggest, one of the things that I'm most excited about with Groupie is using modern tools that I didn't have a decade ago with Lithium, of sentiment analysis and a little bit of machine learning for good measure to help moderators and admins process all of that text. So I am done. If you have any questions about community, how they might help your business now,